Welcome to the Cloud Architects podcast. Chris is ill, but we have Warren back. Warren, we missed you, buddy, but at least you got a really good excuse of that you've been busy for a while. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, dude. It's good to be back. Good to be back in the swing of things. I actually had like 2 full weeks of leave, which hasn't happened in a very long time. I got married, which is pretty
Yay!
cool. Yeah. Destination wedding, lots of beach, sand. It was fun. Honeymoon, and yeah, it was good. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, you should know you were there.
Yes,
but,
yes.
but yeah, no, it
Not
was
gonna
super,
lie,
super
it was
cool.
great.
No, it was a good one. I really, really enjoyed it, and I was actually ready to come back to work. Yeah, so it's been a good week, and we're firing on all cylinders, and happy to be back. And I think today is a very special episode because we've had a sponsor on the podcast for a really long time, um, and they've actually been pretty integral in helping us get the right equipment and making
Yeah.
sure that we were always ready for Ignite. And yeah, super proud to have someone from KEMP finally on the show, to be honest.
Yeah,
So
it's been a very long
I'll let
time.
him introduce himself. Jason from KEMP Technologies. How you doing, sir?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thanks a lot for that, and congratulations as well. Happy to hear that. So I'm Jason Dover, Vice President of Product Strategy at KEMP Technologies, and covers a wide range of responsibilities across product management, product marketing, working with partners, also looking to the future and developing new solutions along with our engineering team that allows us to stay relevant and help customers solve the challenges that they're facing today in IT. Historically, I actually worked in the enterprise IT space myself in administration and engineering, primarily working with Microsoft workloads, Exchange, SharePoint, Active Directory, and the like, predominantly in the banking community. So one of the interesting projects I worked on a while ago was with the New York Stock Exchange, actually, when they went through the acquisition of Euronext, Life, Ames, and a variety of other exchanges, and working with a really great team on integrating those systems, which was pretty cool. So I was excited after having that background and kind of empathy as being a customer to then come to the vendor side and help to actually develop the solutions that helps ensure that applications are highly available, secure, and the like.
Nice.
And the color
Gosh.
and the color scheme, and the new logo and stuff. When that came through, I was super, super happy with that.
Yeah, we were happy to get that out as well and have a little bit brighter, even brighter colors with
Yeah.
our historic KEMP yellow, and now we've added in the Flowmon colors as well. We actually acquired a company called Flowmon Networks back in Q4. I'd say it's more of a teal aqua. So we've been working with the marketing team on kind of blending those nice color schemes, and it adds to our core load balancing, app delivery, web application firewall functionality, now with deeper network visibility, some capabilities for network detection and response as well. And for us, it makes perfect sense, right? We obviously operate primarily at the application tier as an application delivery controller. Flowmon brings to the table a lot of capabilities when it comes to deeper networking visibility. Load balance is part of the network, but it's only but so much that it can really see and do down at that layers. And our vision is ultimately connecting those dots, right? If I can give you context on what's happening at layer 7 combined with what's going on deeper in the network, you've got a much better chance of actually figuring out what the problem is. Is it the application? Is it a server? Is it the network? And that wide range of vantage point also gives you some interesting capabilities in terms of mitigating and detecting security issues as well. So more than just new colors we'll be adding to the playbook.
But that's really cool, and something that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I mean, for years now, the Loadmaster has been the Loadmaster and is still the Loadmaster, right? Every single capability you guys have added over the years has just plugged straight into the Loadmaster. It's like just your fundamentals. So if you install the Loadmaster back in 2013 and you put it in front of Exchange because it was pretty much the only one that could do it, right? I mean, you literally hit the go button and it was like, there you go, you can do your SMTP, your your HTTP all in one go. But like you look at the Loadmaster today, again, it's very similar, right? So there hasn't been like one of those things where you have to relearn your entire certification to understand how the product works. Once you knew how it worked, and it would like literally the virtual would install anywhere. And I think one of the topics that we want to cover today around the Z tag is it's a module, right?
Well, acronym.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Well, Zero Trust Access Gateway. Sorry, you know, working for Microsoft, I assume everybody knows them. But yeah, I think let's talk about ZTag and how, I mean, that just plugs in, right? I mean, it's like literally just plug it in.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Loadmaster is a platform ultimately, and we've built an architecture that, to your point, you can just plug in additional capabilities. We even have something that we call the add-in framework, which allows us to build bespoke pieces of capabilities, and that can literally just be installed, and now you've extended it. On ease of use and so forth, that's also another big part of our play. We have built an approach that's catered to the folks that own the application. Right. So even if you're not networking expert or you're not an expert in a specific domain of the problem we're solving, we intentionally want to make it easy for you to leverage the product. So that's why you're seeing that kind of progressive evolution, but it's not changing the usability too much. On the Zero Trust Access Gateway side of things, you're absolutely right. Of course, we're seeing a big increase in customers looking to start to bring zero trust principles into their ecosystem. And so we've extended some of the capabilities that we have to help customers more easily realize how your load balancer can actually contribute to it. So leveraging our API, some modules that we built, configuration templates, it allows you to get the load balancer in a state that starts to bring zero trust principles into play in terms of the applications that you're publishing, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because the load balancer often is a critical part that you're using for publishing applications. It may be one of the pieces of your network that's as close to the application as you can get to. I'm seeing all ingress from incoming client requests. I'm seeing all egress from server responses. That's why you wind up getting consolidation of stuff there. Where do people put their certificates? Many times it's at the load balancer. Where do I do pre-authentication? Where do I actually do the decryption in many cases? Is that the load balancer? So given that, as it's sometimes said, privileged position that the load balancer has within the application network, it's a great place to consolidate some of these other services. People are really leveraging it for web application firewall. So it's a place where you can also start to adopt some zero trust principles as well.
So let me ask you then, since we're talking about zero trust network architecture, and in terms of the whole zero trust framework, it would fit into network segmentation. So I want to have discrete network segments, and I don't trust everything. I trust as few things, as little as possible. How does a load balancer fit into that from a security point of view? But we understand that from front end, it would be the facing side of the network, if we want to call it that. So you're presenting your virtual IPs out there, and it's your presentation layer. But now we're talking about security, and we know that load balancers can do a bunch of security stuff, which is pretty cool. But we're talking zero trust specifically. So how does a load balancer fit into the whole zero trust network architecture principle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess if we think about, what zero trust and zero trust network architecture is in a from the base, that helps to give us some clarity, right? Because when you think about zero trust, it's really more of a mindset, right? It's not a specific product. It's not a specific technology. Of course, there are some things that have been developed in the last decade plus. I think the concept of zero trust, you can probably date back to 2004, and it's went through this progression over time. But it's really a mindset that says, here's how I'm going to treat attempts at connecting into my ecosystem, right? And if you think about the traditional approach, you had somewhat of the castle moat model that we all probably have heard or were familiar with, or depending on our age, maybe we've implemented that model ourselves at our customers,
I
right?
was just about to say.
I've got this big perimeter at the edge, right? And then
Yeah.
anyone who's trying to connect from outside, I'm going to assume if you're outside, that there's a potential threat there. But if you're inside the network, well, everything's okay. You're safe because you're inside, and that really, with the way that IT has progressed, is a bit of a faulty model from the beginning. Because even with the castle mode, I've got this strong perimeter. There were always going to be conduits and vectors to get in, right? Do you
You
have
plug in a network cable.
exactly? You plug in a network
Yep.
cable from inside, and even from outside. Well, do you have email gateways that I can connect to if I look the right part? Do you have DMZ servers that have some sort of daisy chained access to backend storage in some way? Well, that's how attacks happen, right? I leverage those small vectors, and with enough work, effort, skill, there's still some ways to get through that moat and the walls of the castle, right? So things have progressed anyway because the fixed perimeter has changed, right? There often isn't as fixed a perimeter with work from home, which of course we know has been on the rise over the last 15 months or so. If
Yeah.
you look at bring your own device, you look at cloud, oftentimes the entities that do need access to services are no longer within that perimeter. So I'm already in a place where I have to start to allow for things that are beyond the edge to connect in a secure way. But then
Yeah.
when we look at the threat side of things, well, where are most threats coming from? Well, they're coming from inside a network oftentimes. Even if it started outside, I've gained some level of access to your privileged access system. I've been able to escalate. I've hijacked a legitimate user's device in some fashion, and then I'm using that to move forward. Now, ZTNA, I would say, is a specific product underneath the zero trust architecture model, as it were. And there's a number of providers that have bespoke ZTNA solutions. Different models are in place for some of them. You may have more of a simplistic routing architecture within your environment. The only hop to get anywhere is the gateway to the zero trust cloud architecture, as an example. And same way from outside. Well, you change all the DNS for all of your services to point to the gateway for that cloud service, and it can handle a lot of the processing of identity and so forth. There's another approach though, right? Which is customers are just saying, well, to start, I may not be ready to go that far yet, but I can take what I do have in my network ecosystem. I can figure out who needs access to what are the right flows, and I can arrange the elements within the network ecosystem in order to start bringing in some of the principles of zero trust, which we can dive into as well. So to the first question of how a load balancer fits in, I'll give you a scenario. We work a lot with object storage, right? So customers have been increasing in the use of object storage for internal private cloud applications, right? Of course, it started more popularity with public cloud. I now have these new applications that follows the principles associated with cloud native, and I can be more agile. I can get more value out of the data that I have by bringing object storage in-house as well. Well, many of the object storage solutions have some limitations in providing granular access control, and also in really doing a good job at applying least privileged access, right? So in a object storage context, it's normally applications that are the clients as opposed to actual users, right? The load balancer can play a role there because I can look at different network segments that applications are coming from. I can look at information within their HTTP headers. Normally, authentication headers might be leveraged for doing the authentication. And I can make granular control decisions about, well, this application with this authentication header coming from this particular network segment, should you have write, read, and delete access, or should you only be able to read, as an example? But that
That's
same
super cool,
application,
hey?
yeah, that's just an example of the type of things that you're able to do. So again, because I'm in that privileged position, I can see all the header information, I can see what you're attempting to do. I can really help you apply a strong least privileged access based on various parameters of the connection attempt that you're making.
And you can then essentially remove a lot of the complications around the storage then, right? So the storage account or the S3 bucket or whatever the case may be is, you can then drop it down as much as you want. I mean, it needs access from one place, right? The load balancer.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The load balancer, like we noted earlier, is often being used for doing
The middle, yeah.
pre-authentication as an
Mm.
example as well. Well, I can also make decisions there. If you're coming from an internal environment, as an example, I may not require as many factors of authentication. But if you're coming from external, I may require additional factors of authentication. Think about Exchange, right? You know, it's funny when microservices started to become a more popular approach. It really reminded me, made me think of Exchange, right? Because you have all of these different bespoke services where you need different levels of access to, whether it was ECP, the database, the transport, etc. It was kind of a similar concept, even though it wasn't marketed in that way, right? But a lot of applications are being built that way, where I've got these different bespoke services that can somewhat operate independently for all the benefits that we know that are associated with MSA and DevOps, right? Well, there may be cases where, again, the access level and the specific services that you have access to should be different under different circumstances. Are you connecting to the VPN? Are you internal? Which security group are you a part of? Or are you external? So if you've got an application like that, where you've got these different elements and different services, again, you can leverage the load balancer to make a real-time routing decision that says you should be able to access, using Exchange as an example, you shouldn't be able to get to the admin console if you're coming from an external place. Now, of course, some of these types of things you may have ability to control at the application level, but from just a management perspective, being able to get away from swivel chair management and use this element that's already in place provides convenience for a lot of customers.
And you know, Nick, I'm gonna say it. I say it every show. I say it in most places. Kubernetes. I was I don't know when it was released, but I know that the Loadmaster has an ingress controller for Kubernetes, which I find is also incredibly cool. The fact that you can now integrate these DevOps pipelines into your Kubernetes deployments, and that you can deploy an ingress controller and you can control and manage the ingress controller on a Kubernetes cluster with the Loadmaster. I find that really powerful because, like you said, the certificates are sitting on the load balancer, and how many Kubernetes deployments I've been involved in where the ingress controller and the cert manager pods and deployments don't talk to each other, and it's a complete disaster trying to get the stuff to work. And it's so cool the Loadmaster just puts them all into one place. Really, really cool. I love the fact that there's an ingress controller for the Loadmaster.
Yeah, thanks. We certainly were seeing a lot of interest from customers. And I would say we had worked in that kind of closed alpha and beta for some time, and really went through a strong customer development process. We didn't want to just jump on the train like a lot of vendors were doing and say, hey, we're doing something for Kubernetes that was just a me too and not really that interesting. But yeah, we worked on making it easier for when you're publishing applications. You need the dots connected between what's going on inside of your container ecosystem and what's going on in your publishing endpoint, which often is the load balancer. So being able to bridge the gap as containers spin up, as they spin down, have them connected to your virtual service endpoint based on annotations is again a simplified way of administering that type of environment. And of course, our capabilities plays into there as well, because I'm making those decisions live of distributing traffic. So you can say, well, I have this containerized application that's running with being managed by Kubernetes. Under these circumstances, this traffic's going to be allowed to route here or there, but under these circumstances, it's not. So really getting that granular level of access control, and also being able to have a default state of no trust, right? Because one of the biggest principles of zero trust is that by default, I'm not going to assume trust of any entity. And so you can have default rules that are configured that says, well, everything's going to get blocked, right? It's often not thought that way, but a load balancer really is a basic layer 4 firewall, right? You only are able to allow traffic flows that you explicitly define, and elsewise everything gets blocked. So again, it plays this kind of last line of defense in helping you to start to bring these types of principles into play.
So, Jason, where does a customer start? And I'll take you back in terms of context to the comment that you made around castle and moat thinking and architecture, and that customers are still often on premises wanting to consume something in cloud, maybe also publish a workload themselves, so effectively become a private cloud to themselves, but externally facing. And they're thinking in terms of castle and moat and firewalls, and I'm secure because I spent all this money on a firewall. Where do they start with rethinking towards zero trust principles, and where do they begin? Or is this a cloud play only?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think you've got to go back to first principles, right? About what is zero trust actually about, right? And it's I would say four things, right? It's that you're doing explicit verification of everything, right? So you're going to authenticate before you allow connection. You're going to have, additional authorization under certain cases, and you're going to take into play identity, context, and conditions, right? These inputs, right? And you're going to use that in terms of decision making. As we just talked about in our examples, it's about least privilege. So I'm just going to provide just in time and just enough access based on my strong policies and the jobs to be done in that specific session. I'm going to have application specific access, which is another big part of things, right? The challenge with the VPN approach is, well, I'm allowing potentially untrusted, unsecured devices to actually have layer 3 network access to my ecosystem, right? Which then makes lateral movement a lot easier, right? If I can get into access application A, well, do I even have the ability to look around to see what the additional vectors are that I can perhaps access, what the additional applications and services are, because I'm literally a part of a network, right? Is that really something you want to do with contractors and consultants? So that third principle is about, how do I provide access specific to a particular application at a given time for a restricted period of time and nothing else? And the fourth one is, of course, well, you're going to assume malice, right? I'm going to assure that I'm have end-to-end encryption. I'm going to leverage detection and response technology so that I can monitor connections after they're established, because I'm going to assume that there's a chance that even someone who's good today, or an entity that's good today, isn't necessarily that way tomorrow or even a few hours from now, right? So it comes back to just realizing what you're trying to actually accomplish. So how do people get started? Sure, one way is just I go all in on a cloud-based SASE zero trust model. And I would say vendors that are specializing in that are starting to make it easier to have a transitionary process from what you have today. There's some models where you can even deploy that type of architecture alongside your traditional ecosystem, which includes all your firewalling, your NAC, and your other solutions that you have in place. And that's one model. For other customers, just starting to identify that these are the objectives that you have, inventorying what you have inside of your network, and figuring out how you might arrange those elements to address those principles is a way that a lot of customers find to be practical. I say it's kind of a 5-step process, right? So you know those principles and you say, okay, what does my environment look like in the first place? You need to inventory it, and you need to define the surface area, as is often said, that you need to protect, right? That we used to have the phrase of, reducing attack surface. You can
But
only
how
do
do we
that
start
so
with
much.
that? We're assuming that customers have got inventory and they know what they've got. And tell me how many customers you have who know they've got racks of hosts and VMs, and we're assuming that they know what they have. So how do they even get started with something as basic as inventory?
You're right. That's a big challenge. We find that as well. We ask customers about the number of applications they have, what's the actual performance requirements of the app,
Yeah.
and there's a question mark, right? And look, there's a variety of different tooling that you can implement that helps you to start to get a picture of what the environment looks like. We talked about our Flowmon acquisition as an example, and network performance monitoring being one of the elements there. Well, if you deploy a probe within the environment, you can start to get a picture of who's
Yeah.
talking to who, just as an example. And what are they doing? Is it all encrypted traffic? Is it not? You can get down to more characteristics of what those servers and applications actually look like, the types of
Mm.
flows, which network segments are communicating with which other network segments, and the like. And you're likely to actually start to learn some interesting things that you had no idea about, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it takes some effort, it takes some work, and it's a journey. But the first step has to be getting some visibility, because otherwise you have no idea what you're doing. You
Yeah.
could start putting in policies, putting in rules that's going to break things. You're going to have
Mm.
the legal department not able to get into their legal discovery share or whatnot. So you've
Yeah.
got to put the tooling in place to start to getting an inventory of what's going on, if you don't already have some tools in place that helps you to do that. um, After that, well, you build a map, right? You've
Mm.
got the raw data, and I literally mean build a map, right? You should draw visually how things are connecting. What are the
Mm.
type of application flows that are in the environment? Making some calls. Should they actually be there, or can you go ahead and plug some holes right away? Right. And
Mm.
once you've got those two pieces of intel, well, the next step is going to be, you're going to start to architect, right? You're going to say, well, what do I have? Do I have a network access control system? Which load balancers do I have? How my firewall set up? I
Yeah.
may start to selectively bring in new elements into the environment as well. If I'm not using cloud-based identity that allows me to unify my approach for my on-premises workloads and my external workloads, this might be a good time to start inventorying, or reviewing, I should say, some of those. I
Mhm.
may look at next gen firewall as an example. We talked about Kubernetes and such, if I'm using a very lightweight layer 4 load balancer because my applications are cloud native, I may start looking at bringing in a more mature, more feature rich load balancer that can actually make more intelligent decisions at layer 7, and start to build that architecture.
Yeah.
Uh, Next up, I'm going to define the policy, right? Probably following some sort of something similar to the Kipling model, right? Where I'm looking at the
Mm.
who, what, where, when, why, and I'm going to answer those questions. And I should literally do that on a sheet of paper or a Miro
Yeah.
board or something. Who needs access to what, for what reasons, under what circumstances? And then I'm going to look and see, well, how do I apply that? And we talked a little bit about our solution, our architecture that we call Zero Trust Access Gateway. That's exactly what we follow. So that solution provides XML configuration files where you're able to literally go and define that: the who, the what, and the where. Leveraging an infrastructure as code automation module that we've built on top of our API, where you then feed that configuration file into that automation script. It talks to the load balancers that you have deployed, and it applies that policy and gives you some feedback and logging on what's happened, right? If you need
Mm.
to change it, well, you have an option to just update it, because sometimes configurations do change. Some
Yeah.
customers like to just run that on a regular basis, so that if there's been some local configuration perhaps that's unwarranted or was unauthorized that happened, well, you're able to just reset that back with an automatic run every 24 hours or something like that. But you're going to have some model, and this is why this is going to take time, because you need to
Mm.
see what you can do with the building blocks that you have inside of your network. And then the last step is you've got to monitor it and refine it, right? So you need some model. We talked about at the start that you may leverage network performance monitoring and visibility solutions to get a picture of what's communicating with what. Well,
Mm.
after the fact, you need to continue that ongoing monitoring so that you can make changes as needed. You're going to need to engage with your business units, which again, this is why zero trust is really mindset, its approach, its policy, right? You're going to have to engage with the business units to understand well, how are things going in the environment today? Are we having more support tickets because people can't access what they expected to be able to access? And that monitoring plays another part too. Again, the principle in zero trust is that you're going to have continuous verification. So you're going to need to connect the dots with your network detection and response solution, with your web application firewall, with your pre-authentication. You want strong rules that said, even if I've allowed something to connect, if there's a violation of policy, you're doing something suspect, right? Well, those communications should be cut off, and I need a way to log them into my environment. And that I would say is the general process of how you get started. It's not something you're going to flip on tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got zero trust. But if you follow that blueprint, we've seen plenty of customers that started to bring these principles in progressively over the course of a few months.
Do you find that perhaps maybe the terminology is becoming a little convoluted now? And I'll explain why I say that is, we often get told a load balancer is a load balancer, firewall's a firewall, a WAF is a WAF, well, web application firewall. And since the introduction of software-defined networking and cloud, slowly starting to find that the OSI model is getting shorter, right? We don't care about the layers anymore at the bottom. The layer 1, the layer 2, and even now almost layer 3 is all those things that we don't even look at anymore, because we're more interested now at the layer 7s, and making sure that the application, like you say, zero trust, we're inspecting the packets, the headers to the storage now, whereas before it was writing to a disk. Now we need to inspect the headers, which are going through an API call, which then follows a different process completely. And I'm thinking Gartner, and I'm thinking a whole bunch of these things where they say we've got these magic quadrants about all these things and these firewall suites that happen, blah, blah, blah. Yes. KEMP doesn't have a firewall. I mean, it's not a firewall, but it is a firewall. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so do you find that KEMP is being pulled in multiple directions to add specific features to the product? And how do you make the decision on not calling it a firewall? Because I mean, look, when we think about what the definition of a firewall, it's an ACL, it's an access list, access deny or allow, goes that way or that way. That's the basis of a firewall. If you start including deep packet inspection and all that kind of stuff, it's another technology now. It's not an ACL anymore. So how does KEMP choose what to put in the product and what not to put in the product? Was the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, like, do you consider yourself a security vendor in the space of the Palo Altos and because look, at the end of the day, they have had to create suites of products to stay relevant. And I would say third, which is something that's always intrigued me, is, do you have more virtual load masters out there now or still physical? Okay, I'm done.
Okay, I'll try to answer those in order. So first off, yes, I totally agree. The naming and nomenclature has gotten very convoluted. I think you're right. Since SDN started to become a household phrase, the acronym soup has just been going crazy, right? And it's part of the confusion. As vendors have contributed to confusion on making it clear what customers actually need under certain circumstances. And there's some customers that think you need everything. You've got some senior folks in ivory towers that hear something, they go to a conference, they talk to their Gartner analyst and said, we need that acronym. And now the teams are running around trying to figure that out. So that's dangerous, I would suggest. And vendors need to be clearer about what's needed under what circumstances. I guess it's just par for the course to some degree, though. On the second point about how we figure out what customers need and what you actually build, and are we trying to address every single use case, it's really just zeroing in on what our common customers are ultimately trying to solve for, right? And that's how this solution came about. I'd love to just say, I'm a genius and just dreamt this up, right? But this came from customer engagements that said, hey, look,
Yeah.
we've got applications. We're not ready to like overhaul our entire network ecosystem, as an example, but we need to add additional layers of security. I need more granular controls. I'm also starting to bring in some, I'm going to use a marketing term to some degree, DevOps principles into my environment, right? Because I'm trying to be faster, more agile. It's a initiative from the office of the CIO. You could combine those things. If you can help me to address the security challenges, but help me to start to bring these modern SecOps principles in through automation, that would be great, right? The customer doesn't care about SDP or ZTNA or any real acronym. They have a problem that they're trying to solve. So our focus ultimately is just zeroing in on jobs to be done and what are our customers trying to solve for, and do we believe that it's representative, right? It's not just this one customer in this remote random place, but are we seeing this trend? And that's what we've seen. Like I noted earlier, we're doing a lot in the object storage space, primarily working with Dell EMC on that front with their ECS solution. We've seen it pop up there. We've seen other customers with large scale, front end web applications. We've seen it pop up there. We've seen it pop up in the education space with customers with learning management systems. So there were some indicators that this actually had some legs to it. And so that third point about firewalling and the like, it's again similar. So no, we're not claiming to be a direct competitor of Palo Alto, as you mentioned, as an example. But there's some aspects of what a Palo Alto could do that a customer also expects from a load balancer these days. The bar has risen on what you expect out of your load balancer is the point. It's not just for traffic distribution, right? If you rewind back, load balancers were about, I need to get past the single capacity of a standalone server instance. Well, with modern x86 and advancements in Intel, that's not often a problem. You've got to get to many, many users with very high workloads to actually be beyond the capacity of a single server for your typical SME to small enterprise customer, right? So I'm looking for the load balancer to do other things, consolidating security functions. I expect to get some level of analytics out of the load balancer that shows me what's going on from an application experience perspective. What are my users actually experiencing when they connect in? I'm expecting you, again, in that privileged position to contribute to my security architecture as well. So this is why you've seen some expansion from us, from other vendors, where you're starting to add these ancillary satellites that adds more value to the load balancer, because that's how customers are making their decisions today. If I do just have a simple cloud native app doing layer 4 load balancing round robin, I can go to any number of sources, even some open source stuff to just address that. It's when I have a more complex ecosystem, which if I'm of an entity that's been around for a while, I probably do. And customers are making their decisions based on these types of things. Now, the other question around the layers of the network, I agree there too. There's much more focus on what's going on at layer 7. And it makes sense because that's where most of the threats today are happening, right? They're happening at the application level. So there's a focus there. I can also simplify things. When I do think about my access control approach, I can take a model where I just focus on doing everything at layer 7. That said, you are missing a bit if you do that, right? You think about if I am monitoring an environment and I have some sort of network virtualization in place. Well, I'm not going to get a lot of information if I just monitor at the abstraction level of the network virtualization. I'm going to see the tunnel endpoints and I'm going to see a bunch of UDP, but I'm not going to have a real ability to dig in and actually understand what's going on under the hood. It's only if I go down a couple layers, I strip off the encapsulation header and can actually look inside to understand what the communication flows look like. So yeah, there is more focus on application layer. I personally think that's the right move, but you can't ignore the network because the network's still there. It's still what I'm going on top of. It's still the highway that I'm leveraging. So you need to have some visibility there. You need to have some uh, connection there to actually have a clear picture of what the state of the ecosystem is at any given point in time.
Cool.
I think I covered all of them.
Virtual versus physical.
I knew I forgot one.
But you did incredibly well. I'm super impressed.
You did. Well done.
I think in magic quadrants. So when I'm having a conversation like this, I kind of put the things in boxes and just go and grab them.
I know.
But I ran out because I only have 4 mental quadrants. Virtual versus physical. Yeah. So we're certainly seeing an increase on the virtual front. Again, if you rewind back a bit, customers weren't as comfortable with virtualizing network functions like the load balancer. You expected, that those types of infrastructure critical things needed to be hardware for reliability and so forth. That's changed, I would say, with the advancements of virtualization. VMware, of course, being at the forefront of that, along with others, SROV and other technologies. There's just more of a general comfort level there. And the flexibility that you get, being able to move things around, perhaps move things to the cloud, that's part of the driver. I still will say you have certain scenarios where customers still prefer hardware, right? So in multi-tenant ecosystems, in certain cases, yes, you can get to multi-tenancy by just having different virtual instances and setting them up with strong controls on how traffic routes between each other and leveraging our management plane. But there's still just a leaning, I would say, towards that, because if I have a complex multi-tenant environment, I may want to have, quote unquote, guaranteed performance levels, right? And I may or may not have the skill sets needed to do the implementation. Because right, when you think about the virtualization, I do have a bit more complexity, right? If I've got a performance challenge, as an example, I have to figure out or work with my vendors to figure out, is it the vendor software? Is it the hypervisor, or is it the hardware? Right. And so some customers still prefer the comfort, the phrase one throat to choke, as it were, right? It comes on hardware. I've told you it can do this. It can operate this way under these circumstances, and they go from there. But I would say still that trend is moving towards the virtual front, and we're seeing a big increase in virtual sales.
Okay.
Nice. Do you still, as KEMP, give away virtual load balancers to Microsoft certified folks?
Absolutely. That's something that's been a long-standing model that we've had. We really value the Microsoft community. We've worked with, historically the MCMs and MVPs and PFEs and all the other E's at Microsoft. We've got invaluable feedback over the years that's actually fed into the product. As many who are familiar with KEMP know, we worked with the Microsoft team specifically around Exchange and other workloads when that suite transitioned and started to require, what I would call a real load balancer as opposed to just DNS. Yeah. And working with that community has been a big help for us from a learning perspective, and ultimately helping us to build the right things for customers who have been deploying Microsoft workloads. So our NFR, or not for resale program, is something that's still available. You can find it on the website. Put the information in, and we'll make sure that you get something that you can deploy in your lab. The coolest thing I remember was we were seeing Microsoft content occasionally coming out with screenshots of our load balancer in it, from different Microsoft technologists, which was a pretty cool thing. So we're happy to do that and keep working with that community.
That's awesome.
That's stunning. I'm going to add that to the show notes so it's easy for our listeners to find. Who doesn't like a free load balancer? So we're coming up to the top of the show, and this is where we like to ask our guests, what would they like to plug? So Jason, do you want to tell us, what is it that you've got that's burning on your heart that you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, I would say definitely check out our Zero Trust Access Gateway architecture solution. If you visit the website at kemp.ax, right under the Solutions tab, you'll find a menu item called Zero Trust Access Gateway. check it out. There's a wealth of content that talks a bit more about the concepts that we've been discussing. What is Zero Trust all about, and how you can leverage your load balancer to start adopting some of those principles. You can follow me on Twitter at JYSDover, that's DOVER. And we also have launched a podcast as well called the Application Experience Insights Podcast. You can also find that directly on the website. That'll also be included in the show notes.
When we're going to be on the next episode.
I look forward to it. I can't wait.
You've been a fantastic guest, Jason. Thank you ever so much for the time.
Thank you so much. It's been fun as always, and great to see you guys again.